the story, General Mejuera's Ghost, Bill does that a little better, but it appeared in 1938, and it's a wonderful story, as you'll hear. It was a little long, so I have to apologize. I did have to cut it just a bit. Not enough to quite make the 10-minute limit, Bill, but I think you'll find it goes. The story opens with the unnamed narrator arriving at the Mexico City home of a physician named Slinger. And he was going there, the narrator is, to inspect Slinger's collection of antiquities. He was especially interested in a 400-year-old manuscript said to contain a description of certain tombs and bones of giants that were exhumed by the conquistadors while digging for Aztec gold. Now, the narrator had heard a great deal about Slinger, especially from his friend Dr. Black, who went to medical school with Slinger and who accompanies the narrator on this visit. It's late morning when they arrive at Slinger's house, and they are let in by a mozo, a porter. Slinger appears in his floral pajamas, and he's smoking, quote, a freshly lighted black cigarette of opiate fumes. He's a bizarre-looking man in a bizarre and large room that is just cluttered with all sorts of ancient objects. Two things, though, especially catch the eye of the narrator. One is a jade green stone, quote, shaped somewhat like a half egg and carved with the ubiquitous Quetzalcoatl. That's the plumed serpent of the Aztecs. Slinger had moved to Mexico 35 years earlier when he was in his 30s, and during the revolution had become the surgeon of a revolutionary general named Mejuera. After the war, he established a lucrative practice in Mexico City, but he would still on occasion disappear to live among the Indians and study their herbal lore. The American expat said he had become Mexicanized, and the upper Mexican said that he was Indianized. The other thing besides the green half egg that grabbed the narrator's attention was a, quote, single photograph framed in wood inlaid with bone that sat on the top of a cabinet. And so we begin. When I glanced at Dr. Slinger to make inquiry, his eyes were boring into me, but he waited for the question. Why, that is General Mejuera. He was the gamest general of the Revolution. He was the best friend I ever had. He died in my arms. But where was he from? Why, from Oaxaca? Well, I knew that Slinger had practiced in Oaxaca before coming to Mexico City. Well, he was in charge of the revolutionary forces of Oaxaca, Slinger went on. Nobody else could have handled the Indians as he handled them. I was his chief surgeon. In fact, when the fighting was hottest, I was his only surgeon. After one battle, in 24 hours' time, I operated on 800 men. But Dr. Slinger, interposed his medical friend, that sounds incredible. That's humanly impossible. Oh, I'll admit, Slinger laughed, that some of the operations were hasty. A lot of the wounded would have died anyway. It was sort of like administering extreme unction. I got so damned exhausted cutting and cutting that finally I had a mozo strap my body to his. He supported me while I went on using my arms to cut. I wouldn't have gone through what I did for anybody but Mejuera. Now, as everybody knows, when the revolutionists finally won out, the country was still divided among local leaders. Villa was still out in the north, and to the west, the followers of murdered Zapata remained unreconciled. The oil companies around Tampico were paying another general to protect them, and Mejuera, he held out too. But the fighting was mostly over, and there wasn't enough money in Oaxaca to support a doctor, so I withdrew from the army and came up to Mexico City and opened the office I have now on the Avenida Cinco de Mayo. Well, I had not been there long when a government agent called on me to use my influence to persuade Mayweather to give up. I thought it was the best thing for him to do. I received absolute promises that he would be safe physically, and then I went down to see him. He was a little fella. He weighed less than 100 pounds. The force in a man's veins, the energy in his spirit, and the light in his eyes are not things that weigh. He embraced me, he trusted my judgment, and he promised to come up to Mexico City right away and make his peace with the powers. And he kept that promise. Now, there was a whole corps of staff officers to meet him at the station. He was conducted to the president's palace, served a big banquet, and then for 2 weeks wined and dined like a visiting king, which he was. Now, I saw him nearly every day, and I saw him going to pieces. He never had been a city man. He was a man of the campo, a native of the wildest Sierras. One afternoon, I was summoned to the hospital, and there I found Mayweather in a paroxysm of pain. He was absolute master of himself, however. He told me he had been poisoned, and after examining him, I had no doubt of this fact. When his pain was at its worst, I held him in my arms like I would a child, and thus he died. I saw the attendants lay him out, and then I came home and came into this room to read and to try and throw off my depression of spirit. I had lost, as I've already told you, the very best friend of my life. For maybe an hour I'd been trying to read, and I always use strong lamps. When I heard a slight noise, I looked up, and I saw Mayweather. "What are you doing here?" I said. "Well, I have to come to tell you goodbye and make a request," he answered. He was standing in front of me, and I reached out to grasp his hand, but I could not feel it. Then I passed my hand through his body without feeling it. Yet he looked natural, and his voice sounded natural. "No," he said, "you cannot feel my body. I am dead, nothing but a spirit. But the request I make is this, that you educate my 2 sons and see that they get a square start in life, that you guard my daughter until she is married, and that you act as advisor to my wife. You will need money to fulfill such a guardianship."